Hello. We will now discuss chapter 2, where we actually meet Matilda's family. We're kind of thrown into the chapter in a discussion that Mr. Wormwood is having about, well, as the title said, what a great car dealer he is. And of course, we remember from the previous chapter how sad Matilda is, and getting to know the members of her family, you realize how different they are to her. So Matilda tries to engage with her father to understand what he does, and he automatically shuts her down. He's not interested in her, and more importantly, turns around and refers to Mike, his son, who will be the one who takes over the business. Mr. Wormwood is kind of just pictured as a really awful character. He's very much a caricature of a character. He doesn't he you know that the narrator wants you to dislike him. The way he's described, what he dresses, which is really a little bit ridiculous, the big checks and the colors that he uses, and of course there's nothing wrong with the colors, but the way the narrator describes it is specifically for him to sound like he doesn't look quite right. And of course, there is the tone with which he speaks, which is very insolent and very rude. And given that we already think that Matilda is quite a lovely, incredibly talented young girl, he is completely dismissive of her, which doesn't strike the reader very well. We also meet Mrs. Wormwood, who essentially supports her husband and her husband's endeavors, which are dishonest in terms of his car dealership. And she is depicted as a feminine woman who is obviously trying to make herself look attractive, but in the description, it's clear that she's not managing so well. So both in terms of her physique, that she's a larger woman, but who dyes her hair platinum blonde and the roots are coming through, so she doesn't really do it very well, and thick makeup. We get the feeling that although she's trying to focus on that, she's not doing such a good job. And we do meet Mike, who is the younger brother, who really is a bit of a shell of a character. We don't find that he has much to say. He agrees with his father, but in comparison to Matilda, he basically doesn't have much to contribute. And this kind of also insinuates the fact that he isn't exposed to the education that Matilda is seeking for herself through her reading. This quote, which we will look at, comes when Mr. Wormwood has been describing what he does with his cars, so taking really old, decrepit, falling to bits cars, which he gets very cheap, and then stuffs the gearbox with sawdust, which is free for him, and then also is able to run the mileage back so that the buyers don't realize what they're buying. And of course, Matilda raises her hand to speak to try and understand what's happening. So as she goes, "How long will it run like that before it starts rattling again?" Matilda asked him. This is when he's described putting oil and sawdust, and like that, the buyers can drive off for a while without noticing that there's anything wrong with the car. "Long enough for the buyer to get a good distance away," the father said, grinning. "About 100 miles. "But that's dishonest, Daddy," Matilda said. "It's cheating." "No one ever got rich being honest," the father said. "Customers are there to be diddled." So this passage clearly frames Mr. Wormwood as the villain. Mr. Wormwood is describing how he's able to fob his cars off to customers and get away with it, whereas Matilda, who's a little 4-year-old, not even 5-year-old, is able to flag up the fact that his behavior is immoral. However, when you're looking at their conversation, it is very clear that Matilda is the one, although she's the one who understands what is right, what is wrong, she's highly offended by Mr. Wormwood's her father's business practices. She's also just shut down by her father and cast aside. She is also able to bring us to look to view Mr. Wormwood as even though he is successful, even though he has a lovely house with 3 bedrooms upstairs and it's described in such a way, we don't see this as inspiring, and we already get the feeling that this is these are ill-gotten goods, as in this is, as Matilda calls it is dirty money. Mr. Wormwood is already seen as a bit of a bully, of course, and we're seeing Matilda trying to make sense of this based on the fact that she has educated herself in a different way, away maybe from her home values, whereas where we have Mike, who is entranced by the telly, and Mrs. Wormwood also entranced by the telly, as in that is basically where they get their information from and their values from, are fully supportive of Mr. Wormwood's behavior and the way that he is cheating his customers. Now, again, going back to Mike, he barely has any conversation in the chapter, and that just makes us think that he is basically compliant. He agrees with what his father is doing. Also, what you feel that Matilda is a shining beacon, right? She understands, she already has a sense of right and wrong. She already has a sense of ethics. She understands what customers would feel like, and also the consequences of that. Whereas the mother, Mrs. Wormwood, much rather pretend nothing is happening, everything is fine, listen to your father, enjoy what we have, and so on. And this gives the reader a feeling that something along the line will eventually change. In this passage, it's found towards the end of the book, and what's happened is, after the discussion about Mr. Wormwood and his trickery, and after Matilda has basically called him dishonest, they're infuriated. The family have to sit down and have dinner in front of the telly. She is not allowed, forbidden to go and read a book by herself instead of watching telly and eating her meal on her lap. She realizes, and this is where again the power struggle that you constantly see between grown-ups and Matilda and children in general, she decides that it is best if she is silent. But of course, what happens is that all of this anger boils up in her, and she's infuriated and starts thinking about things. So what's written is, the anger inside her went on boiling and boiling as she lay in bed that night. She made a decision. She decided that every time her father or her mother was beastly to her, she would get her own back in some way or another. Small victory or two would help her to tolerate their idiocies and would stop her from going crazy. You must remember that she was still hardly 5 years old, and it is not easy for somebody as small as that to score points against an all-powerful grown-up. Even so, she was determined to have a go. So here we have the clear depiction of all of these themes. You have the smallness of Matilda, who's, as she's described, hardly 5 years old, who is so angry at her parents. And within this anger, she says that she hates her parents. And even there, she also understands that that is wrong. You're also able to see that the exposure that she has gotten through her literature, through reading, her trips to the library, has given her a very clear moral compass. And she knows right from wrong. She knows that she is not stupid. She feels terrible, and she feels very upset that she is being called stupid because she knows she isn't. And also at the same time, there is, but before this passage, there's a little piece about how she wishes that instead of watching telly all the time, her family would read a little bit, and that would make them give them a better sense of morality. There's also the idea that morality is the correct way to go, that in the end it will prevail. So there's always this link between reading and morality, and how the educated are more moral, have stronger values, and hopefully will prevail. But at this point, this passage is very clear in that she's just a tiny little girl, and she's up against these all-powerful grown-ups. So how is she going to do that? And her strength of character comes out here. So the fighting injustice, the idea of going against all odds, is that she's determined to have a go. That means she's determined to try and get one up on them. Of course, it's not going to be a huge victory, and you don't even know, the narrator gives that sense of how much is she going to be able to do, this tiny little girl against these grown-ups. But what it does say, it does imply, is that number one, she is very clever, and this education is going to give her the tools to be able to score some points, as he puts it. And also she is still superior to her parents, and this small victory will also keep her sane. So it says it will keep her composure. It's the one way of keeping her composure and her sanity in essentially a terrible household, a household where, again, she is neglected, they are nasty and unreasonable.